What's going on, everybody? I'm Jeff Carpenter with Ready Light Media and Next Level Workshops. In this video, we're going to dive into the difference between strobes with colored gels and RGB LED lights when photographing portraits. So if you've been curious about what fits best with your style of photography, this video is for you. So let's jump on in. Before we start comparing the two, it's really important to understand what each different type or style of light is. So gels are basically just plastic sheets like this more traditional gel sheet, or we've also got these magnetic clip-on gels that I'll be using today on my strobes. One of the benefits of shooting with gels is its simplicity. It feels very analog to me. If you want to change the color, all you have to do is change the gel. It's as simple as that. Now let's talk about RGB LED lights. You'll probably hear me refer to them just as RGB lights because that's a lot simpler. One thing that I love about these is you can just dial in any color either with an app or on the back of the light to really get the look you want. So that gives you a lot more flexibility with color compared to gels. Now the other thing that's cool about these is you have a constant light, so what you see is what you get. So if you're not familiar with shooting with flash, this might be the way to go for you. RGB lights are especially useful when you want to match color across multiple shots. And another thing you can do that's really cool with these, you can actually add effects to get multiple colors across multiple shots really quickly without the need to change out gels. All right, now that we've discussed the difference between RGB lights and colored gels, let's dive into some more details on the pros and cons of what each system has to offer. One big pro with shooting with strobes and gels is the power output. Now this doesn't necessarily mean it's a con for LED lights, but you do have a lot more power and flexibility to shoot in environments that you might need to overpower ambient light. Now in the past, I leaned a lot more towards shooting with strobes just because a lot of times when you're shooting with RGB lights is you do have to up your ISO quite a bit to get the look you want. That's not so much an issue now. A lot of these cameras these days, you can shoot at 1600, 2500 ISO without any noticeable grain. Now, depending on the strobes you're using, gels tend to retain color consistency along the power spectrum, whereas LEDs might have a slight color shift when shooting at a low power compared to a high power. However, as I mentioned before, with RGB lights, you do have the ability to dial in the exact color a lot quicker than when shooting with gels. So this might actually be a benefit for you, especially if you're using gels as a color match rather than a creative effect. Now, when it comes to general ease of use, I think this one has to go with RGB lights, honestly, because as I mentioned before, RGB lights are what you see is what you get because they're constant lights, so you can pre-visualize your look before you even take a single frame. Now on the flip side of that, strobes are a little more complicated, so if you're not comfortable shooting with strobes, you might want to lean towards RGB lights. Now 5 years ago, we probably wouldn't even be having this conversation, and that's because the technology of LED lights has come so far, and specifically RGB LED lights. Now, one of the major benefits of shooting with strobes was you had a ton of modifier options. Now you have a lot of modifier options with RGB lights and LED lights as well. What was kind of an issue is not anymore. Another thing is you used to really just, if you wanted constant lights, you were probably using big, heavy, very hot, very expensive cinema lights. Now we have a lot more affordable options that can get you the shots you want. That being said, if you are already in a flash system and you're just wanting to play with color, gels might be your option because that is a lot more cost effective. Now on the flip side of that, if you are starting fresh and you don't have any lights and you want to play with color and also have really high quality lights that can create just generic portraits, headshots, branding photos, anything like that, you might want to look into LED lights. Now, this comes from me. I shoot both pretty consistently, and it kind of depends on the environment I'm shooting in. Is there a lot of ambient light? Do I need to overpower any sunlight? Anything like that as to what I'm gonna choose. All right, now that we dove a little deeper into RGB lights versus colored gels, why not use both? That is one thing that I actually do a lot, where I'm able to create a really unique, very cool effect by freezing motion with my flash and then allowing some light trails with my constant light. So let's jump in, let's take a few shots, kind of see the difference between RGB lights versus gels, and then I'll let you decide which one is best for your style of photography. I originally started out with a 3-light setup. I'm actually gonna move it to a 4th. I'm gonna take this Nanlite FS300C and put it behind the V-flat, pointed up at my cyc wall. And the reason for that is I kind of want to shoot a little bit low to high, and what that's going to do is that's going to basically lower the background, and she's going to extend beyond it. So by putting this, I'm just kind of playing into that. We can kind of play around with some colors on the space above her head, and I can kind of just line her up with the angle of the V-flat and just kind of get something fun and creative with that. So originally I was just going to do a black background, but not anymore. So one example of when you're shooting with RGB lights in an environment that has the ability to have ambient light, this shot here, I have blacked out the room. I've covered up both my windows, turned off all my lights, whereas this shot here, I still like it. It's still a really cool shot, but I don't have the control of that environment. So when you have RGB lights, sometimes you do kind of fall prey to ambient light. Not saying that you can't take a great shot, but it just means you don't have that control that you're gonna have with strobes. If you want a really saturated photo or a really saturated look with RGB lights, you have to have control of that ambient light. All right, so now we've got our gel set up. We set up a similar shot to the one we did with the RGB lights. It's a little bit different, but it's relatively the same. And one thing you'll notice here is we've got all our ambient light up and it's not affecting our photo at all. So we can go ahead and just start taking these photos. With these types of gels, I do like them because it is still pretty quick in the realm of swapping them out to a different color. So if I want to swap this out, let's just say I want to do like a lavender instead of the blue. It's just like kind of a light purple. I can just pop this in, bring that back up, and now we're off to the races again. So this one's obviously more of like a red tone here, but you can kind of play around with that. But again, the thing with gels compared to RGB lights is you are limited to the gels that you have. So with these ones, you know, the click gels, I have just a handful of actual colors. Obviously I've got a lot more when it comes to the sheets, but they don't fit into this thing. At least I don't think they do. Let's see. Hold up. It technically does. It doesn't clasp though, that's the problem. There we go. So I just mixed a blue with that lavender color. So now we've got like a really deep dark purple. So you can, that's one thing with gels that you can do is you can actually stack them and get them to really kind of play with what you want rather than just kind of being left at the devices of the hue and the saturation and the power of the RGB lights. So again, both of these can kind of play to what you want and what your strengths are as a photographer, what you're more comfortable with. Whereas there's no right answer of like, this is what you should do. If there was a right answer, there wouldn't be two different versions, there would just be one, but now we have two, so you have to make up that choice and make that decision on your own. So one thing I love using RGB lights for is creating a long exposure effect. And typically I'll have my subject move and keep the light stationary, but today we're making things extra difficult and we're having to count and get all in sync with each other. So I'm over here with the light, Mario is over there with the camera, and Emily's here doing her thing. So what we're gonna do is, I'm not a big counter, but what we're gonna do is I'm gonna count 3, 2, 1, shoot, and we're gonna try and kind of create a background interest by moving this tube up and down. And we're at a, what's our exposure at?
5.4 seconds.
So 0.4 seconds, so it's not quite a full second. I would love a full second exposure, but the reason why we're not doing that is because I can't completely black out this room right now, or else you wouldn't be able to see us, and it would just take some extra setting up. So what we're doing with this is we're having to kind of play with the ability to black out as much as possible, which means a slightly faster shutter speed, which means we got to really be able to communicate here. So let's see if we can do it. We'll see. We got one already, so, you know, but let's see if we can do it on camera. All right, ready. And 3, 2, 1. I mean, that's pretty good. I'm not upset about it. But that's another way that you can basically use RGB lights and flash together to create a long exposure like this and get something really cool. For this is kind of like a fitness look. You can kind of play around with it, do whatever you want, get creative. But again, I hope you found this video helpful in deciding what suits your style of photography best, whether it be colored gels on strobes or RGB lights with constant lights. Now, I unfortunately can't give you that answer, but I hope this helped open up some doors and helped explain some things for you. But if you have any questions at all, you can reach out to me on Instagram at ReadyLightMedia or nextlevelworkshops.com, and I'll see you next time.